Hello, my name is Heidi Kuhn, and it is my great honor and pleasure to introduce Cheryl Jennings, ABC Channel 7 news anchor, and also the recipient of the Marin Women's Hall of Fame 2008 in the area of public affairs. Cheryl, welcome, and it's an honor to have you here. And tell us a little bit about your childhood, growing up, and how that has influenced your life.
Well, I am the eldest of 7 children, and my dad was in the military. And my mom told us that we moved 22 or 23 times by the time I got to high school. So we traveled all over the world, and I changed schools about 15 times, somewhere in there. So I missed some classes now and then, but I loved the experience of traveling and meeting new people. It was hard, though, as a kid, because we'd always have to leave our friends behind. So I learned how to make friends very quickly and how to let go of things. So I think that was really good training, as hard as it was as a kid, for what I'm doing now.
And do you think your travels around the world has influenced your global vision and your ability to see things from a different prism of light?
I think that seeing other people in different situations in different countries absolutely influenced me. I didn't know it at the time. It was a process, it was a journey for me to get to the level of understanding I have now, also certainly an educational process, but we didn't stay in one place ever, and so we always had to meet new people and new challenges. And when I see those things, I always want to explore it now, just out of curiosity, because I was kind of forced into it, and then learn to embrace it.
And many of your siblings, I understand, are locally based. Are you close with them today and their nephews? And tell me about their influence in your life.
Oh, I have the most wonderful family. I have, there are 5 girls and 2 boys, and we have 16 or 17 nieces and nephews between my husband, Rick Pettibone, and myself. And we love to spend time with all of them as much as we can. It's hard to do that because we also do a lot of community affairs work, and we try to serve the public as much as we can, because my husband and I have both been very, very blessed with our jobs.
And at one point in your life were you influenced to go into media and television? Tell us about that transition. How old were you, and what influenced you into the area of broadcast television?
Well, I'm from a generation where my role models were my mom, and she was a fantastic role model, but she worked with the kids. She did not work outside the home. And my parents had given me a suitcase when I was 18, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So I went to City College of San Francisco because I couldn't afford anything else, and put myself through school and just started exploring things. I had always been good in English, I always had curiosity, loved people. So I thought, well, how can I translate into things? What is there for me out there? My dad wanted me to be an Army nurse, and I just really didn't want to do that. And when I told him I wanted to go to college, he said, well, why do you want to do that? Because, you know, you're just going to get married and have kids. And I said, well, I just want to learn things, you know, and I don't know what I want to do. So he thought that was just fine, and was willing to keep me on his insurance policy until I was 23. So that helped a lot. But at City College, I found a journalism department and the newspaper, the school newspaper. And I got on the school newspaper, and it was so exciting for me because I could go out and I could talk to total strangers, and they would have to talk to me. And I would do interviews, and it was fantastic. And then I'd get my name in the paper, and when you're 19 years old, that was thrilling. I was like, oh my gosh, this is really, and of course nobody knew me or anything like that. It was just nice to see that I had accomplished something and that I was acknowledged for it. So that was the beginning of a growing sense of self-esteem. But still, I didn't know what to do because there weren't a lot of women in broadcasting or media at that time. This was back in the 70s. And I was watching television, and I saw 2 women on television at that time. That's all there were. It's much different nowadays. There are mostly women on television. But back then, 2 women, and 2 women's names in the credits of the news programs. So I called each of those women up and asked them if they would do an interview with me for a school project. By then, I was taking English composition, and I absolutely detested it. I just hated it. But I thought, okay, if I have a really good subject, then I can do this. So I interviewed these women. That changed my life. That set me on the path that I am on today. Because number one, they were doing something that only men had done, and I thought that was extraordinary. And number two, they agreed to see me. And they spent time with me, and they didn't have to do that. And they were my first role models aside from my mom. Just wonderful women. They spent as much time as I needed, answered every question. Here I'm this little kid, this little upstart. Who am I? I'm nobody. And these famous people were taking time with me. So wrote a paper, got an A on it, loved it, and then decided to finish my journalism there, and went to state and studied broadcasting there. And did a combination of newspaper, radio, and television. I wanted to learn everything I could about everything. And when I was at state as a junior, I finally got a job as an intern at a radio station. I had applied to 20 television and radio stations, and I was rejected by 19 of them.
Isn't that something?
I got in as a volunteer at KNBR Radio, and was going to school and taking engineering classes. So I'd work 5-6 days a week as a volunteer, take my nighttime engineering classes at La Cañada College in San Mateo, and then commute back to Novato. So I do the loop from Novato to San Francisco to San Mateo, and then back to Novato about midnight. But I was determined, and I had taken the advice of these women who said, work as hard as you can. That's what it takes.
And tell me, part of your legacy is mentoring young people and children. I know personally from my daughter how much she deeply respects you and what an influence you've been in her life. But you've mentored so many young people. Tell me about your inspiration for doing that.
Because these women mentored me. And also, the very first person who actually took a chance on me for a job was a female in public affairs. So it's kind of come full circle for me. Jane Morrison, who is an amazing lady. I think she's 83 now, and still going strong. Drinks her milk every day. Still active in politics and the Democratic family in San Francisco. And her husband was a supervisor, Jack Morrison, back in the day. And she agreed to let me work for her for 50 hours for free.
Did she?
And I was so happy to do that. So I literally sharpened pencils and went and got sandwiches and made tea for her as she would do her public affairs shows. In situations like this, she would be interviewing people in the community. Tremendous influence on me. And then all the time she was teaching me about public affairs, I was still trying to get into the newsroom. And eventually I got a job as a receptionist on the switchboard, for which I got paid. And I'm still going to school and still doing the commute, but I got into the newsroom as a news secretary eventually, got a full-time job. For that, I was paid $100 a week. And coming from being broke, that was a fortune to me. But it still cost me to go to work because when I was volunteering, I was commuting, it cost me gas, so I was living on my savings. So anyway, I got that job, and then eventually worked on my voice, worked on my writing, and begged my news directors to please listen to my tapes. And they told me I was terrible and that I had no business doing this. And eventually I was good enough or acceptable enough or wasn't that terrible to be allowed on the overnight shift on a Friday night. I got one shift, and for that I got paid $100. So I'm thinking, one 8-hour union shift, one 8-hour secretarial shift. I think I really like this.
You are a pioneer in the field of broadcasting.
Well, probably the second wave of women, and I wanted, when these women opened doors for me, and I wanted to do that for other women. So I had a great time working at KMBR Radio. Then I worked for their FM station as a newscaster for a few months. Then there was a manager in the building, and I won't say his name, but decided that, and he said this to us, women don't belong on the air, and fired all the women.
Really?
Off the air. So I went back to my secretarial job and just had a good attitude, was nice to all the people who were still helping me aside from this person, and eventually got a job at K101 Radio, and 4 months later I was promoted to news director. So I was the second female news director in the market in radio at that time. It was
And what
just-
year
it
was this
unheard of.
approximately?
This was about 1977 or 78. So then I worked for K101 for 2 years and worked for Jim Gabbert. His entire sales staff was comprised of women. And we worked hard. Well, we loved it. And eventually, Channel 5 came calling. I'd heard that they were looking for a woman. They had to hire a woman for affirmative action. And somebody recommended me, and I applied for the job, and I got hired. But I didn't want to give up my radio job because I knew I had a sure thing here. So for the TV job, I said, can I make a deal with you? Can I work for you in the evenings and still keep my radio job? And the radio, Jim Gabbert, I said, can I work for you and still work for, and they were okay with it. So I worked at K101 Radio from 9 in the morning until 5:30, and then I drove over to KPIX and worked for them from 6 until midnight. And I did that 5 days a week, and then on Sunday I pulled a full shift for KPIX as a reporter all day. And I did that for a long time, about a year and a half, and then eventually couldn't take it. It was so exhausting. I eventually gave up the radio job. And then we had a management change at KPIX, and I was low in seniority. And that particular manager said, well, I don't like her hair. And he said, get that woman off my air. I had the radio look. I had like short, frizzy, curly hair, because I thought it was about journalism. And I just went in there and I did the job. And but then it started to dawn on me, oh gosh, I probably ought to try to look nice too. So, so he did me a favor.
Yeah, you look pretty nice.
So I started really working on my appearance as well as my other skills. And eventually I got hired at Channel 7, and I was never out of work. They gave me 1 week's notice at KPIX. And my last story for KPIX was after I had already been fired. They aired a story that I'd done. And so that was on a Sunday, and I started at Channel 7 on a Monday.
Isn't that something?
So, and I've been at Channel 7, worked my way up at Channel 7 from field reporter, nighttime reporter, to fill-in anchor, fill-in talk show host, fill-in whatever you want me to do, just let me do it, to anchoring the 5 o'clock news and the 11 a.m. news right now.
You really are a self-made woman. You pioneered this and continue. Now tell me about your current position and how it's evolving within broadcasting today.
Right now I am anchoring the 11 and 5 o'clock news, and I also I host a show called Beyond the Headlines, which is a community affairs show. So I'm back to my roots, back to community affairs, where I get to focus on one topic for half an hour. And in fact, you and your daughter were one of my first guests. And that's actually how we formed our little campaign for children to raise money for landmines.
That's right.
If you recall.
And
I had invited you to be my guest, and they canceled the show on us. And I knew that you were driving in with your makeup on and looking pretty, and your daughter had the day off, and I said, look, they canceled the show, but since I know you're going to look gorgeous, I have to take you out to lunch so you don't waste all that work. So you and Kylie, at the age of 16, and I went to lunch at Il Fornaio in San Francisco and sat there and talked about what we could do to change the world. And we came up with pennies. And the inspiration was Oprah.
yes.
Because Oprah had encouraged kids to raise money, and one of the kids that she had encouraged to raise money, small amounts of money to do things, he called me and said, Cheryl, I'm doing a story that Oprah inspired me to do, so I did a story on him. And he is the one who came to my mind when we were talking. And so the three of us said, what can we do? What can we do? And we came up with the idea of a plan so that every single child could be a philanthropist. If you can contribute a penny from your lunch money or by collecting cans, and you can be a philanthropist and help somebody else. And it's so fantastic because now we have kids in more than 200 schools. Kids in the poorest neighborhoods who are raising money
in Oakland
to help complete strangers in Afghanistan to make their lives better.
And we've raised, coining that phrase, giving 2 cents for peace, we've raised, through the leadership of 3 women of 3 different generations, 15 million pennies for peace to take out landmines and put schools and soccer fields in Afghanistan. We've just finished our 5th school, and we're looking for a 6th.
It's just hard to believe that we've come this far in 5 years.
Right.
But we're not done yet.
We're not done. We're just getting started. I love the story because that was such an inspiration to me, because I've been working on the landmine issue as a recipient of the Marin Women's Hall of Fame for so many years. And you came up to me one day and you said, Do you remember
what it was? It was at a party.
It was
completely by chance.
By chance, by complete accident, with George Sumner, wonderful local artist. And you had come up to me and you said, this is going to start with children, because I've done AIDS and I tried to get that into the attention. Could you tell about that story and how you really helped catapult the issue of AIDS to the international agenda?
Well, back in the early 80s, when the AIDS epidemic was just beginning, people were so afraid, and we didn't know anything about it, and wouldn't take the time to educate themselves. I remember, and this was a long, long time ago, at our old building at KGO, and these people are all gone now, but we had somebody who had AIDS who was going to come to the station, and we had people who walked out of the room. They wouldn't even be in the same room with them. And I just thought that was horrifying. And then I learned more and more about it, and people didn't even want to talk about it. And I thought, how can I do this? How can I tell this story? And I found a woman who was holding summer camps for children with AIDS. She'd moved from children with all sorts of life-threatening illnesses, Jerry Brooks with Camp Sunburst, to focusing on children with AIDS. And I went to her camp because I wanted to show people that you don't have to be afraid of children with AIDS. And so I got on a horse with one of the little girls, and I put that picture on television because I wanted people to see that I'm not afraid. I'm touching this child who has AIDS, and we need to take care of these kids. And so from there, telling that story through the eyes of children started saying, oh, okay, maybe I need to pay attention to this. And so eventually we got more and more. I'm not trying to take credit for AIDS coverage at all. I'm just at that time there was a real void in people talking about it. I just wanted to get people to start talking about it, because once you start getting people talking about it, it has this ripple effect where it'll grow and grow and grow. You and I call it drip, drip, ocean. A little drip at a time, and then this little thing just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And
could you tell us about some of the other charities you're involved in?
Gosh, I have such a list of them. I have to think. Most of the work I do, I like to focus on children and family issues. I've learned that kids are a whole lot smarter than we give them credit for. Kids look at things very simply, very easily. They don't make it complicated, and they really get it when you talk to them about things. So I've done stories with children with AIDS, children raising pennies to help other children. They get that. It's not about, oh, I don't care about landmines because I can't relate to it. I got my own problems. It's like, oh, I'm going to care about somebody else, and I'm going to do something about it. So to get back to your question, my very early work involved child sexual abuse. People were not talking about it. There was no documentation. I would read articles in the paper and I thought, this is horrible. Why isn't somebody doing something about it? I had a great childhood. I'm so lucky. One of 7 kids. With all the turmoil and travel we had, I had a great childhood. I can't complain. But these kids, what's going on? So I started talking to the San Francisco Child Abuse Council, and I said, tell me about this. And I had a police officer come to me one day, call me up because he knew I was interested in this issue, and he said, look, I've got a warehouse full of child pornography, and I can't even talk about this publicly to the media. And I said, why not? He said, because nobody will believe it. So we'd have to do our interviews with him out of uniform. That's how controversial it was. And again, this was back in the 80s when people wouldn't talk about these things. So I've always tried to start something, when I'd see a problem, I tried to get involved and get in there and just make people talk about it. And then it will take care of itself, or at least it will start something. So I've been on with the San Francisco Child Abuse Council ever since then, so nearly 30 years now.
Nearly 30 years.
Yeah.
Isn't that remarkable?
So that's one of my big passions. Love working for Ronald McDonald House in San Francisco and Palo Alto, and Campo Kaizu, free camp for kids who have cancer and their siblings and their parents, and also Camp Arroyo, the Elaine Taylor Family Foundation for kids with all sorts of life-threatening illnesses. So I MC their fundraisers every year.
Would you like to talk about walking through a minefield, going to Afghanistan? Because people, I think, don't often realize that journalists are human beings, and the preparation and the terrorist training that you had to take in order to take a risk on going with a mother and a daughter to Afghanistan was extraordinary.
Once again, somebody came to me and said, here's a problem. I want to tell you about it. I want you to do something about it. I said, okay, well, let me learn about it. And this was CARE, International Relief Agency CARE. And CARE talked to me about the situation in Kosovo. And I got permission to go to Kosovo to show what Americans were doing to help the people in the refugee camps there. That was a journey for me because that was the first time I'd ever really dealt with the landmine issue. You went to the Balkans. You and your daughter went to the Balkans. So while I was doing my journey, you were doing your journey, completely separate from one another. We were sort of, eventually we would join forces, but when I saw how these people could not feed their families and how little kids were losing their limbs and farmers were losing their limbs and animals were losing their limbs and the country couldn't move forward, they were having to rely on foreign aid. They could just not get their country together. And it was so undignified. I mean, you have a country falling into a deep depression because the father can't feed his family, very patriarchal situation. So it really hit home with me. And then when I did a 6-part series on that, showing the problem, we went back 2 years later with CARE. And I was told by CARE that my story, they used my story to raise funds, that it raised about $150,000 worldwide. This is at a time when people really didn't care about landmines at all. And went back and showed some of the same areas where we had been before, where the fields were unproductive because of the landmines. And people were growing crops. They were feeding their families. And they were becoming self-reliant again. It was an amazing feeling to really see that firsthand. So I brought that story back. But still, no impact locally. Can't get the attention. I was trying to do my drip, drip ocean thing and it wasn't working. So I met you. You and I went with your daughter. Kali was 16 when we met. Then she was, I think, 18 when we went to Afghanistan. And we were more scared going in than we were scared on the ground.
Yes, I remember that.
Because it was the fear of the unknown. And there was so much violence. And there was violence where we were going, and the risk of having a Taliban person or just a regular thug kidnapping us for ransom was very real. Not to mention the landmines. Forget the landmines. And we went, and it was such a journey. I will never forget this. Going through that minefield with you and your daughter, and my photographer, Mike Clark, we were this close. I mean, literally, Mike was zeroed in on that landmine that the guy was poking his stick at. Beep, 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 you were on the right side. Kylie was over there. I was behind my cameraman. I thought that was smart. And but he was right there. So if that mine had gone off, he would have been the first to take the brunt. And we were in full gear, nevertheless. They were very careful with us, though, and made sure we weren't injured. So it was great. We did a great story. And from that, finally, we've gotten some traction. Right. To get people to raise awareness. But it took the Penny program to get people's attention.
Cheryl, there's often such a hope gap in the United States with children. They've lost their hope, their sense of hope. You mentor children. What advice would you give them, or do you give them to inspire them to rise to the stars of their greater destiny?
I just mentored a big class of kids yesterday from Oakland, and one of the advice that I would give to young people, boys and girls, is first of all, you have to be a good person. You have to care about people. And you have to get an education. You have to get an education. You cannot fail in that. And you have to be good in English. These are basic things. Good in English, good in spelling. Learn how to use a computer. I mean, it is so simple, and I meet so many kids who can't do that. Learn how to shake hands properly. When I work with kids, it's as basic as, show me how you shake hands. Do you have a firm handshake? Especially with girls, because they're afraid, oh, you know. And a firm handshake indicates confidence, and I tell them that. I also mentor students from UC Berkeley, and they've come from very, very deprived backgrounds, and they don't have people to model for them. And so I get as basic as, show me how you shake hands. Are you making good eye contact with me? Are you chewing gum when you're trying to talk to somebody? What's your posture like? How are you dressed? Are you dressed appropriately? Very, very basic things, but I think it's also important to get those skills in place that we talked about. But I keep stressing education. And for kids who want to have the job that I have, or any job, I tell them it's all about writing. It's all about good communication skills, good verbal skills, good speaking skills, good writing skills. It's very basic. Any job you apply for will require those skills. And that will take you far. And your work ethic is really going to help you shine.
Cheryl, you have achieved so much in your life. 25 years in broadcasting in San Francisco. I think that's a legacy, a crowning legacy. What's next for you?
I have no idea. I have so many things that I want to keep doing right now. I feel like I want to finish something. I want to raise so much awareness about landmines.
Thank you.
That it will be mainstream and people will say, landmines, yes, I will help you, because it's that important. And it will benefit their lives if they take the time to see. Continuing quest to raise awareness about child abuse, domestic violence, caring more about our seniors, and just taking care of families. Those are my goals. I just want to keep doing what I'm doing, and I'm so fortunate that I am where I am and I'm allowed to do that. Once I'm not doing that, I'll still volunteer. I won't be getting paid for it. Once again, just like in the beginning.
Full circle.
But it'll be okay. I'll know a lot more. So
Yeah,
I would say
yeah.
stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned. What a beautiful way to end the interview. It's been an honor and privilege to interview. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Appreciate it.